The White House just labeled President Donald Trump as a fascist, and anyone who opposes him a domestic terrorist. But that's not the story being reported by corporate news outlets, and is nothing close to what far-right media is telling its viewers.
President Trump is targeting the left-wing Antifa movement, labeling it a domestic terrorist organization.
So most broadcasts started out like this, using the White House's framing of anti-fascism as a leftist fringe idea, and not what it actually is, which is a core tenet of preserving democracy.
Even though no such designation exists under U.S. law.
So then they go on and usually follow it up by hand-waving away the seriousness of this executive order, which designates anti-fascists as domestic terrorists because of some legal technicality, as if the confines of the law have ever stopped Trump from doing anything.
Speech or his remarks at Charlie's, at what I call the first MAGA state funeral.
See, this is them building up Charlie Kirk's death as this huge idolized turning point in our society. They're calling it a state funeral, which it's not. A state funeral is for an elected official, a head of state, some diplomat or longtime leader who passed away, which Charlie Kirk was not.
On Sunday. Then the throwdown yesterday against Big Pharma. And on top of that, going in to sign in afterwards, Antifa is a terrorist organization. And then today at the UN, you see an arc. And I think...
See, they don't waste any time backing up the president, not only designating their enemies as terrorists, but with other initiatives that they know are popular with their audience. And so by doing this, they're lumping these things together, saying, well, if you are against Big Pharma, which universally a lot of people are upset with the cost of healthcare, they're saying that if you're upset with something like that, you should also be upset or support the designation of anti-fascism as terrorism, which the two aren't hand in hand at all. And most people wouldn't consider attributing Tylenol as a cause of autism as taking on Big Pharma. But that's how it's being framed here.
You mentioned getting at Antifa. This is critically important because that's an organization, a terrorist organization, as the president rightly described them, that does not operate in a vacuum. They get funding. They get other forms of support. There's an ideological basis there.
So they're describing a huge covert operation, which anti-fascism isn't. They're using the ambiguity in this executive order to fill this silhouette of a villain. And because the designation in the executive order is so broad, they can get conspiratorial with it, which people love to get into conspiracy theories, and people of that mindset are just dive right in. And so they can get conspiratorial, claim with no evidence that Antifa is this intricate network funded by wealthy liberals.
All of that happens through NGOs and think tanks and nonprofit organizations and donor-advised funds and other entities that are given preferential tax treatment by the government because they're supposed to be, quote-unquote, charitable.
One of their ultimate goals with this, in addition to using the federal government to target, harass, jail, imprison anyone that the Trump administration deems disloyal, is defunding anything or any cause that is not in line with the administration. That's why they're branching out into terrorism charges, because that allows them to seize funds, take away money from things like nonprofits. It could be nonprofits that have to do with housing and homelessness, or with helping members of the LGBTQ community. Those can now be deemed as funders of terrorism, and they can be shut down. Also, this guy's organization also takes a ton of government money and takes money from wealthy people. The irony shouldn't be lost on anyone that this guy, who is funded by billionaires on the far right, is attacking nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity for taking government funding. But they're able to use this attack and use this broad umbrella of terrorism, domestic terrorism, because the executive order is so ambiguous. And while the right uses the ambiguity in the executive order as a strength, traditional outlets keep picking at it as if it's a weakness, like they've done with so many things the Trump administration does or attempts to do or announces they're doing, chalking it all up to another wacky, incompetent move by the administration and not another giant legal loophole left there on purpose.
Trump says he wants to label the anti-fascism movement, Antifa, a terror organization. Trump called Antifa a, quote, sick, dangerous, radical left disaster. It's not clear who or what the government would actually go after, though, since Antifa is not exactly a structured group. It's more of a loosely organized movement that doesn't have a leader or necessarily a list of members.
But what they're missing is that because it's not an actual structured group, the White House is able to make a member list of sorts all their own. The list that they published along with the executive order outlines exactly who they're going to use this terrorist designation against, which I'll break down in a minute. Meanwhile, alt-right media is drawing comparisons to real terrorist organizations that already have a negative association in the public's mind. So when someone is inevitably charged with these domestic terrorist charges, that association is in the audience's mind, and they connect those organizations with whatever charges and whatever person is being attacked by the Trump administration.
Has a years clips going back maybe a decade, talking about Antifa, all kinds of people.
Oh, and here's something really interesting that the far right does. Even though they have spent essentially decades attacking, tearing apart, and just destabilizing the credibility of news and reporting in the Fourth Estate as, corporate media, which a lot of it is at this point. But while they've attacked it, they always use established, trusted news organizations as their evidence. That's how they cite their sources. So even though that they deride these sources, they immediately use them as soon as they back up their claims. And oftentimes they are distorting the facts that are being reported to back up their claims, but it still works for them as a way to associate something honest, trusted, and reliable with whatever it is that they're pushing.
And I did a documentary interviewing people about this. Chuck Todd has talked to someone that wrote the Anti-Fascist Handbook, this Mark Bray guy that taught at Rutgers. Joy Reid, Joy Behar, Chris Hayes. The list goes on and on, trying to say that there's I don't even know what this is. Joy Behar did one of these things where she was like waving her arms like a lunatic. And lastly, the Nicole Skanga thing, I would say, yes, it is an ideology, but it is also very structured, as you say. So I say, why not both?
Yeah, well, Al-Qaeda subscribes to an ideology. It's also very structured.
See, so now Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda as he's calling it, is associated in his audience's minds as being part of the anti-fascist movement. And so when someone is charged as an anti-fascist, in their viewers' minds, they're going to bring up images of actual dangerous, violent terrorists.
And so, of course, it's both. They know it's both, but they want to just hide any aspect of leftist violence. So now you've got the mainstream media literally protecting Antifa. They're protecting drug dealers. They're protecting illegal aliens. They're from MS-13. It's really quite stunning.
So they repeat over and over, and it's not just in this broadcast, but every night, that the mainstream media is trying to protect Antifa, when in reality, they're just trying to honestly describe what that word even means. And so you have this back and forth where mainstream media is tirelessly trying to explain the nuance, and the right says that they're sympathizing with terrorists.
Last night, President Trump announced that he is designating Antifa as a major terrorist organization and recommending that those who fund it be, quote, thoroughly investigated. Nicole Skanga joins me now. Nicole, it's great to see you. So we use this word, and we can't assume that all of our viewers know what it is. So first, what is Antifa?
So here it is. Now we're going into the origin, the context, which is important to know, but they're about to get so lost in the context and defining every single aspect of this issue and getting it not just right, but expert level precise, that they're losing what this executive order actually is and what it does, because they're just so focused on the accuracy of the complexity of the situation, which is important. It's important to understand that these are complex issues, but the right uses that hyper focus on an obsession with objective accuracy as a weapon, because while they're doing this, the right is doing what we've been seeing them do.
Antifa is shorthand for anti-fascist. Now, the anti-fascist movement has roots back in Nazi Germany, pre-World War II Italy. It was popular in the 1980s. But the first time we actually see the term, the moniker Antifa, used for a U.S.-based group was in 2007 out of Portland, Oregon. And that group also gained popularity, if you'll recall, Ouija, after the Charlottesville rioting that occurred in 2017. There was a sort of resurgence back back then. But unlike some other quote unquote terrorist groups, there's really no membership list. And speaking with experts today about the movement, they likened it to feminism to me, meaning that it's an ideology, it's something that people subscribe to in their beliefs, but it doesn't necessarily have an organizational structure, a hierarchy, or even a central bank for that matter.
What they're doing is by explaining the facts, which is true, that there's no Antifa group, that anti-fascism is a state of mind, it is a desire to preserve democracy. What they're doing is they're also in effect kind of pre-neutering the dangers of these executive orders, this one and others like it, by saying, well, they've designated this group as terrorists, but that group doesn't exist, so it doesn't really do anything. When the reality is the administration is able to then take this executive order and fit whoever they want inside of it. In the description they use right now, feminism as an ideology, anti-fascism as an ideology, it's a very helpful and accurate way to describe it, but it's also one of the favorite tools for far-right media when this explanation is used. Because now there's this argument of ideology, which the right is then able to take the outline of and fill it with every ideology they know that their audience doesn't like.
For the longest time, they were saying speech is violence.
See, and that's the mischaracterization they've used with free speech to the point where it is now an accepted fact in these media spheres. Their argument is that traditional media and outlets have said that speech is violence because the right has been reported on accurately as the instigators of violence through speech. There have been multiple shootings from the right, from people with right-leaning political ideologies. There are far-right militias. There are insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol, hurt people, broke into the building, had plans to murder members of Congress, and then were pardoned. And so that violence was justified because they've spent so much time picking apart at the idea of free speech as not the ability to speak freely, but the ability to speak what they want to hear freely. The entire definition has changed in this mindset.
That's why they would go after Trump for his colorful sayings.
And that's a perfect example of it. Trump's colorful sayings, like he wants to throw his enemies in jail, like he thinks that reporters should be killed, like that he wanted his supporters to go to the United States Capitol, break in, and overturn the election results. That's not colorful speech, that is violence, and it's been treated as such.
Unless the speech literally encourages violence, whether it's river to the sea or shouting Intifada, then it's just words. It's just freedom of speech. I don't think it was ever really about Antifa. It's about our leaders who shed their responsibility in protecting the community from them in favor of this kind of suicidal empathy that Gad Saad talks about. That excused the violent anarchy because we were supposed to empathize with these outsiders.
See, and this is just another way that they're constantly creating an other and making anyone who doesn't agree with what they say on the outside open for persecution, prosecution, harassment, because they are the others. And the people that conservatives listen to on the far right are telling them not to empathize with anyone who doesn't believe and think exactly like them.
In the same bucket as BLM and trans, and I'll throw in the KKK, Harold, to make you happy, in which they demand us, Antifa, BLM, trans, KKK, they demanded us to submit to their brand of militant grievance.
So this is what I was talking about earlier, where they're taking this outline, the silhouette of what Antifa is, because there is no actual group or organization, but it's an ideology. And so they're taking these other ideologies that they know will create a visceral reaction with their viewers. The KKK, and I mean, most people, except for probably at this table on this news broadcast, most people don't like the KKK. They also lump in Black Lives Matter, which their audience has a negative response to say the least. Then they also bring in, feminism and other in the transgender community, which they have conditioned their audience to hate and have created them into their own boogeyman entirely. And so they are putting all of these ideologies under the umbrella of Antifa. So again, anytime that someone is charged as being Antifa as a terrorist under this executive order, This is the imagery that will be put in people's heads. And if they turn to traditional reporting, they will get nuance and backlog of information and hemming and hawing, and well, they could be Antifa. And it essentially gives this irresponsible way to cover this executive order the cover that they need to continue doing what they're doing.
If you did not agree, if you did not kneel or take a pronoun, you were the enemy. If you said boys are boys and girls are girls, you were a bigot and you got a target on your back. So it's all like Antifa is a very small group of losers and miscreants and buffoons. So it's about the leaders, and I'm going to say this, nearly all of them Democrats who chose to appease radicals over the safety of Americans because to them it was a virtue signal when it really was just suicide.
So they're able to continue weaving this narrative. And well, all this happens. What this executive order actually does, its implications, and what it says about the administration are completely left out of the conversation. So after Trump issued his executive order that designates anyone opposed to fascism as a domestic terrorist, his office published a poorly sourced list of examples of anti-fascist violence as a way to justify this order. The list includes criminal charges, not convictions, just charges, against people from the left, the right, and incidences that weren't politically motivated or even violent at all. The executive order actually doesn't mention political leanings either. Even though Trump and his team publicly say the executive order is targeted towards radical left terrorists, in actuality, there's only one criteria the White House has that they consider being anti-fascist, being anti-Trump. The most glaring example the White House gives of what they consider anti-fascist behavior is near the bottom of their list, right between Luigi Mangione supporters and people who sent vials of blood to the RNC. It says, in 2024, President Trump was shot in an attempted assassination at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. 6 weeks later, President Trump was targeted in a second assassination attempt in Palm Beach, Florida. There's only one thing that connects both assassination attempts. It's not their political ideology. They weren't working together. There's no shadow organization funding either of them. And neither of the two had coherent goals they wanted to accomplish. The only thing the two would-be Trump assassins that the White House has now labeled anti-fascists have in common is that they were against Trump. With this executive order, the White House has made its goals perfectly clear. Any person, organization, nonprofit, anything who is opposed to Trump's vision for the United States is in opposition to fascism, and by extension, seen as terrorists by the United States government.